Okay, so we are looking at our handout. The handout that we're looking at is called Unit 3 Review B. So gave it in class today. If you're absent, that's what it looks like. And first of all, what we're going to talk about is material that we've already discussed before. One of the things that you should know is that we in this Unit 3 have talked about empires and like how these empires are using different methods to maintain their empire. First of all, for gunpowder empires, we should be able to identify by name 3 different empires that are Muslim and 1 empire that's East Asian. And the 3 gunpowder empires that are Muslim, of course, you should know are the Ottoman, the Safavid, and the Mughal. So you have the Ottoman, the Safavid, and the Mughal. And then the one East Asian empire you should know by name is the Qing. That's Qing. Now, the thing about the Qing, there's another line right below it that we need to talk a little bit about, and we need to identify something else about them. And that is that for Chinese history, you might remember that the Mongols had taken over China. That was like really embarrassing for a non-Chinese dynasty to take over. But there was good news because there's a group of people called the Ming with an M, the M-I-N-G, that freed China for a brief amount of time. But there was a group of people that took over China again. And these group of people, they were actually northeast of China. They're cousins. They're distantly related to the Chinese, but they're not Chinese proper. And they invaded China and they took over. And they also took a dynastic name. And because that's a group of non-Chinese people who took over, it's important to know their ethnic affiliation. So these people from northeast of China, they're from an area called Manchuria, and their ethnic group is called the Manchu. That's M-A-N-C-H-U. That's going to be on the second line. In East Asia, this empire was run by the Manchu. So there's 2 different names that you should know that are interchangeable: the Qing dynasty, and they are also known as the Manchu. Now, the third line, it says that 2 of these religions were religious rivals. And why? You should know that of the 2 Muslim empires that didn't get along, there was the Safavids and the Mughals. They were not friends. They did not get along. They were rivals mainly because they represented 2 different branches of Islam. You might remember for Islam, there's 2 main branches. There's the Sunni and the Shia. The Sunni are the majority. The Shia are the minority. And the Shia are the ones that have like a real big affinity for Ali, the relative of the Prophet Muhammad. And they believe like Ali's the best. He's the greatest thing ever. And it turns out that at this time, the Safavid Empire was Shia. The Ottoman Empire was Sunni. And this caused tension between them. Though they were both Muslim, they were incredible rivals. On the next line, it says, one of these empires was a religious minority ruling a religious majority, and that would be the Mughal Empire in India. The Mughal Empire was like 20% Muslim, and the rest was Hindu or other religious groups. And so this is an example in the Mughal Empire of a religious minority ruling a religious majority. And because of that, they couldn't like do all the things that they might want to do with Sharia law or Muslim law. And so we see a spirit of religious tolerance at this time because they realized the numbers just don't make sense. You might remember in that spirit of tolerance, they did away with the freedom of religion tax. You might remember that the leadership of the Mughal Empire actually encouraged their people to like intermarry with Hindu princesses. And this was most famously done under this leader, a leader you should know by name, whose name is Akbar, Akbar. Now, also in the Mughal Empire at this time, because it's this era of like religious freedom, there's also a rise of a new religion that mixes some elements of Islam. For example, they believe in only one God, but also it seems to be inspired a bit by some elements of Hinduism. And that's a new religion called Sikhism, which is Sikhism. There's some videos that we watched in class that I'm going to tag in this YouTube in the description of this YouTube video in case you missed that. I know one period we didn't get to watch that video at all. Now, really generally, what new technology was used by these gunpowder kingdoms, these gunpowder empires? That's easy. It would be guns, obviously. That's one way they built these empires. And then we have 4 ways that these new empires consolidated or justified and legitimized their rule. And so those include, number 1, religion. Religion's the first way that empires consolidated and legitimized their rule. two examples, but I could give you more. The first example is in Europe, and Europeans used this concept. It was a religious concept that actually justified them politically. And this is a concept that says that I'm king only because God actually put me on the throne. And if God's the one who placed me on the throne, then I don't really see there's a sense of accountability to an average ordinary person. This concept is called the divine right of kings, and this was all throughout Europe at the time. Now, the Muslim world has another concept that is also an example of religion using to justify, to consolidate power. And for Muslim leaders, they claimed that they were part of a chain of leaders that went from them all the way back to the Prophet Muhammad. You might remember that when the Prophet Muhammad ruled, that after his death, there was no prophet that took his place, because Muhammad had said that he was the seal of the prophets. He was the last one. There was no more prophets coming after him. But they do need like a practical leadership. And so there was a leader that came after Muhammad who had the title the Caliph. And that's what we're going to put here. This Islamic leaders claim to be the Caliph. That's C-A-L-I-P-H. And the Caliph is the successor to the prophet. And if Muslim leaders say, hey, I'm the Caliph, they are connecting themselves with this chain of authority going back to Muhammad, and that makes you more legitimate. So religion is number one. Number two is bureaucracy. We've talked about the word bureaucracy many times. And there's two examples of bureaucracy for A and B. And bureaucracy basically means these are government workers, right? They're administrators. They're people that represent the empire throughout a vast stretch of land. And the two examples we have, letter A is the word dev shirmi. We need to identify where that is and what basically that is. You guys should know by this time that the dev shirmi is in the Ottoman Empire. And you should know this is basically a form of child slavery or a child tax, where different communities in Southeastern Europe have to present these kids every year, a certain percent, a certain amount, and they're taken into slavery. Now, the good thing, if there is a good thing about this form of slavery, is that there are opportunities for you to work your way into influential areas. If you were very intelligent, you might get a quality education, you might become an administrator, a tax collector. Others might be able to be part of an elite military and become part of what were called the Janissaries. So there's opportunities here, but still make no mistake, this is a form of slavery. And this is a way that you can control who these soldiers and administrators are. This is a way that you can actually raise them as Muslim and believe the things you want them to believe because they were taken as slaves as an 8-year-old. Now, China also has to solve the problem of wanting administrators and needing administrators and making sure that those administrators are on the same page. And for them, they don't do it through slavery. They do it through, well, an old favorite. They bring back a form of evaluating administrators they'd used for a long time. China used, you should know, the civil service exam. And you should know for sure that the civil service exam made you memorize the Confucian classics. And that way, if you wanted a job, you had to know Confucianism, just like the dev shirmi made sure that these Christian boys taken as slaves learned Islam. The civil service exam made sure that these applicants knew Confucianism. Number three, a third way that you can legitimize your rule is by art. In fact, on the DBQ, the last document we had on the document-based question was a painting of Peter the Great. And whether if it's a painting of Peter the Great or Louis XIV, if you have these paintings that show your ruler as mighty and as strong and as confident, it kind of, makes him seem legitimate in the eyes of the people who are seeing this artwork. So number three is art. And number four is an extension of that. Is architecture. So you can have monumental architecture, big buildings that are built that tell outsiders that this is a powerful country. For example, you might see that in France with the construction of the Palace of Louis XIV called Versailles. You could see this in even the Vatican. You know how the Catholic Church built St. Peter's, which was that church in Rome that was constructed using money from indulgences. And of course, it could be a capital city on the water like Russia will build for themselves later. Speaking of Vatican City, let's talk about the three types of Protestants. We've mentioned this before. There's three types of Protestants. The first and oldest type of Protestants are what we call because they're named after the guy who started the Protestant Reformation, they're called Lutherans. So number one is Lutherans. And you might remember that they came to reject the Catholic practice of the sale of indulgences. You might remember that Catholics at this time and today believe there's three things that can happen to you when you die. Number one, you go to heaven. Number two, you go to hell. Or number three, and this might be the majority of humanity, you're going to spend some time in a place of waiting, often described with language of punishment, called purgatory. The thing about purgatory could last for 1,000 years. We don't really know how long you're going to be in purgatory, but there's ways you can speed up your time, and that is buying these certain documents that are called indulgences. So letter A, they came to reject the sale of indulgences. Luther thought this was wrong. He said it wasn't taught in the Bible. He said, where can you find this? It seems like you're doing something to get to heaven, and that doesn't seem like a free gift to me, Luther said. In fact, Luther stressed, letter B, the need for salvation by, you'll write down, faith alone. It wasn't faith plus Mary, or faith plus baptism, or faith plus the rosary, or faith plus the Virgin Mary, or faith plus the Pope or priest. It's actually just faith alone. All you really need to do is in your heart believe that Jesus Christ died on the cross, that he rose from the dead. That's it, faith alone. And letter C, early document that really kind of describes some of these early arguments for the Reformation is the 95 Theses. The 95 Theses is those arguments that Luther makes as he famously, the story says, nailed his essay on the door of a church in Germany. Second type of Protestants are Calvinists, and they stress that humans have done nothing to deserve salvation. You and I have done nothing to deserve salvation. And Calvinists and Lutherans agree on that idea, but the Calvinists take it to an extreme, to a position that they are most famously known for, and that is that they stress what's called the sovereignty of God. If God is sovereign, he's in control, he's in charge, and they stress the sovereignty of God as demonstrated by this belief. They have this belief that says that before the world was made, before earth was made, before you were born, God has chosen some people to go to heaven, and God has chosen other people to go to hell. Your destiny has been decided before any of these, before you ever took a breath. And this belief is called predestination. And we'll write that down for B. It was demonstrated by predestination. Some people are predestined for heaven, some for hell. The third group of Protestants are called Anglicans. So Anglicanism, you might remember, broke with Rome for political and personal reasons, not for purely religious. The guy you should know for that is Henry VIII. You might remember that Henry VIII was looking to have a marriage absolved so he could have a male son. The Pope didn't feel comfortable, and ultimately Henry VIII broke with the church in Rome to start the Church of England, or the Anglican Church, and he gives himself the authority to take over. And for letter B, the king claimed to be the head of the church. And now that Henry VIII is the head of the church, he gives himself permission to have that new marriage he desperately wanted. And this is an example, letter C, of the government using religion. And so he made himself the actual leader of the church. So yeah, governments can use religion sometimes. Now, some people weren't really happy with how the Anglican Church was really day-to-day working, because actually if you went to an Anglican church, it might look in very many ways very similar to a Catholic church. Stained glass, statues, priests wearing the same type of outfits. And remember that Anglican church didn't break for theological, for religious reasons. And so some people saw it as, this is just like a Catholic church without a pope. Some people would make that oversimplified argument. And so some people in the Anglican church thought, you know what, we need to get rid of some of those Catholic influences, and we need to become more Protestant, more like the other movements. And it says that later there would be those who want to purify the Catholic Church of, they would want to purify the Anglican Church of Catholic influence. And because they wanted to purify the Anglican Church, there's a name for them. We call them Puritans. We call them Puritans. On the backside, the Catholic Church doesn't want to take any of this. They don't want to just let go of Europe and give up in the face of Luther and Calvin's questions. So they have a response. And the response is something called the Counter-Reformation. They're countering the Reformation's points, or sometimes called the Catholic Reformation. Either way, Counter-Reformation and Catholic Reformation, they're talking about the same thing. So there's three things that there was an assigned PDF file that explained these three things that you should know by name. And these are three things that they did to respond to the Protestants. Number one, the first thing that they did was that they used arrest, questioning, and even torture and death to root out and punish unbelievers. This process where there were courts that would have the legal authority to arrest you and question you, torture you, and even kill you, sadly for believing the wrong things, was called the Inquisition. This was called the Inquisition. That's Inquisition, the Inquisition. And so this was one way to, identify troublemakers in the community. You can put them on trial, and some were killed, but for the most part, people said, hey, I know how to play the game. I'm going to say I'm sorry. I'm going to repent. I'm going to recant. And many people avoided death penalty as a result. But still, it's an attack on really freedom of religion. Number two, not only do they arrest and question people for having Protestant and other questionable ideas. Number two, they also want to send people out that are well prepared, well trained to answer those Protestant questions. Number two, a missionary society of highly educated priests were sent out to counter Protestant questions and spread the faith to the Americas and even going as far as Asia. This organization of people were called the Jesuits. The Jesuits, that's Jesuits, and they're part of a group actually called the Society of Jesus. There was a man named Loyola, was his last name, and he actually started this group. They said, we want to be loyal to the Pope, we want to study, we want to be intellectuals for the Catholic faith, and actually they're like the advanced, the GT, the National Merit Scholar students of the Catholic Church. They're the smartest Catholic priests you'll ever meet. That's why they were ideally suited to answer Protestant questions and to be sent out all around the world. And they did go all around the world. In fact, it says letter A that they were so well educated, they learned local languages. They went to Canada, they learned Native American languages. They went to Japan and China, they learned the languages there. In fact, they were so good at what they did, it says letter B, they were so talented, they were even hired by the Chinese emperor. So imagine like you're so good at your job that the emperor of China wants you to work for them. And that's a big deal, especially in light of what the Chinese generally thought about non-Chinese people. Broadly, the Chinese had a negative view of non-Chinese and their cultural abilities. And so if the Chinese emperor, the emperor of China, wants to hire you, a foreigner, this white man who has come to learn Chinese, that's a big deal. In fact, they were so good at their Chinese that, number one, that they actually wrote books in Chinese. They're not just like, oh, how are you, greetings, where's the restroom in Chinese, but they're actually writing books in Chinese and books on like astronomy and books on physics and chemistry in Chinese. And that's quite an impressive thing. Number two, they also brought with them Western knowledge. So they brought with them knowledge from Europe into China, which also made them interesting for some Chinese leaders to hire. But not everyone was super happy, and especially we'll see in some countries they get banned and even tortured. So Asian governments later even ban or torture the Jesuits, but they persist. And in fact, one country you should know as a famous example, the Asian government that most famously persecuted them was actually in Japan. And you might remember we talked about Japan, that there was a system of government where they had an emperor, but he was just like a figurehead, and really above him, the real power was in a person called the shogun, who was the real leader, the real practical person with power. But then there was this point, there was these local governors called daimyos, and these local daimyos had practical power. Well, there's a government that wanted to consolidate and get rid of the power of the daimyos and become more powerful. And in doing so, not only did they eliminate the daimyos, but they also want to eliminate the Jesuits. And we want to make sure we know this group of Japanese leaders. It says they were most famously persecuted by the Tokugawa Japan. So Tokugawa is Tokugawa. Tokugawa Japan, that's the group that most famously persecuted the Jesuits. So number one, we had the Inquisition. Two, we have Jesuits. And number three, the last thing that they did to deal with the Protestants is they had this meeting. They had a church meeting where they said, hey, we got to figure this out. Is Luther right? Is he wrong? And what they do is they decide to have this meeting that corrected many of the abuses of the Catholic Church. So like, okay, we're not going to like sell indulgences anymore, and we're not going to tolerate priests doing these things that are not okay, or we're officially not going to tolerate that. And they also reaffirm Catholic doctrine. They say, no, Luther's wrong about faith alone. It's faith and works together is how you get saved in the Catholic sense. but they also want to make sure that you're not reading bad books. And so they put together a list of books called the Index of Forbidden Books. This is a list that includes books later by Charles Darwin. Darwin wrote On the Origin of Species, a book about evolution. Galileo, who was the Catholic, wrote a book that argued that the Earth is not the center of the solar system, but actually goes around the sun. That is put on the banned book list. These are all books Catholics are not supposed to read. Well, the decision for the books and the decision to correct some things in the church and the decision to reaffirm some Catholic doctrines, all this happened at a meeting called the Council of Trent. The Council of Trent. So 3 things the Catholics did to respond. They met at the Council of Trent. They created Jesuits that sent them around the world to convert people and to answer Protestant questions. And number 3, the Inquisition. Lastly, Russia. So compared with the rest of the world, Russia, or the rest of Western Europe, Russia had a reputation of being culturally and technologically backwards, right? Russia had been cut off from the rest of Europe during the Mongol occupation of what we call the Golden Horde. That was the name of that time. And they had this reputation of being backwards. So some leaders saw Russia's greatest need was to westernize or to modernize. And for our usage of the word westernize, that always means to become more like Western Europe. And the leader who wanted to pursue this policy the most was a guy named Peter the Great. He was the one who really wanted to modernize and westernize. He was so into that he actually planned and fought a war with Sweden to take a city off the Baltic Sea, which he did, and he built a brand new capital, which he said would be his window to the rest of Europe. That new city he built from scratch was St. Petersburg. And finally, that new capital was built as a model of Versailles, the French palace outside of Paris. And with that, we've gone through the review. I'd encourage you to go through the review. We'll turn it in for a grade in the morning. We will not use it on our test. Also, there are PDF files of Unit 3 I would encourage you to check out. With that, hope you do well and good luck preparing.